Hi guys, I am in Billings, Montana in a hotel room. Kind of looks like a horror movie. It's not. And I'm gonna tell you about my critical issue in education. So I chose the opt-out movement, or basically when students decide not to take a state standardized test, which has been happening a lot in New York, New Jersey, Washington, and Colorado. Basically, students are refusing to take state standardized tests because they feel like the tests are too difficult, a waste of time, and demoralize their students. So parents think they demoralize their students and test them on irrelevant information. And then another summary is states are trying to decide how to penalize schools, or if they should penalize schools and school districts whose students don't participate. Some pros of the opt-out movement are that students and parents feel like their voices are being heard, about their lack of contentness with how much testing there is and the type of curriculum that they're being tested on. And I found like 2 New York Times articles from 2016 and 1 NPR article about Washington and New York City students opting out. And another pro is the increase in student opt-out is actually getting the attention of higher-ups in education. So in New York, Secretary of Education John B. King Jr. Started noticing when a bunch of students walked out on tests. Cons to the opt-out movement, and there are many. Because federal law requires 95% participation in an annual assessment of 3rd through 8th grade, districts that fall below that threshold can face sanctions from their state. Also, the opt-out movement is prevalent in middle and upper middle class white families. So most students who are opting out, at least in the beginning of the opt-out movement, were just white students, which is interesting. And the reasoning you could say for that, and this was never correlated in an article, this is more of me correlating these two, is that in Washington state, whenever a bunch of students boycotted, there were 42,000 students who refused to take state tests, and 22,000 of them actually showed up on the day and had protest signs, and the other 20,000 just didn't come to school. They just had it as a skip day of school. So it wasn't like they were actually protesting the test, it was like they got a free day of school. Another con is that when a lot of students opt out, the test data is no longer relevant, because basically when there's a bunch of students who don't come, students from disadvantaged communities, their data gets eroded. And I'll talk about that more in a bit. And also they found in New York City, the students who were skipping most were students who scored a level 1 or level 2 on the state exam the year before, not students who scored really high on the state exam. So students who are scoring low are the ones who are opting out. Okay, so my stance on the opt-out movement, even though there are a ton of cons, is actually that I'm for the opt-out movement in general, for people who are actually doing it for the right reasons. So I have taught for 2 years, and I think there is a really aggressive focus on state testing. And it leaves out a lot of skills that are really important for students to develop, but since they're not on the test, if you try to teach them, administrators are always getting you in trouble, or you just feel like you don't have time to teach those kinds of skills, like interpersonal skills, communication skills, coping mechanisms, things like that. And it just creates a non-student-centered environment in a lot of schools, at least at the school I worked at recently. And it can force some struggling schools to cut back on enriching programs like field trips and arts education, and at least in my school in the past 2 years, they cut a bunch of programs so that we could have more test prep programs so we could increase our test scores. So basically teaching kids how to take tests instead of having field trips and all these other cool things. And this was also reiterated in a New York Times article. So another reason that I feel like this is a really good thing is that it's one of the first times in a few decades in education that students and parents have actually had a voice in their education, instead of just being bystanders and watching people create laws that they didn't believe in. So in Baltimore, a lot of racially diverse students walked out and rallied outside their school's district's headquarters to protest the state exam, and they're basically saying that their school is underfunded and they have a lack of culturally diverse classes that they're allowed to take, and they're taking a stand until it gets fixed. Also, just personally, I've seen a lot of teachers revert back to like lecture-based instruction because of state tests, because there's so many standards and they're so intense that teachers are like, okay, the only way I can do it is packing it in, and I gotta finish all the material and not really focus on student learning anymore. Okay, that was a lot longer than I thought it was gonna be, but thank you guys.